All right. Well, I did not have to plan on having to do this on Sunday. I didn't plan on sleeping till 12:30 either, or whatever damn time it is. Um, yeah, I've been suffering from that cold, and last night I went to bed at like 9 o'clock, and I didn't get up until noon. Drank coffee, and then I came in here so because I figure everybody wants to hear what people have to say about this Maduro shit, and I have some opinions on it. Uh, it's taking me it's taking me a full day to get to where I can think about it like relatively um, with some relative construction and have like some kind of constructive take on it, I guess. I'll say it first when it comes to foreign policy, the Trump foreign policy has been much better than U.S. foreign policy prior to Donald Trump. Part of what we're seeing, and I think Trump has tried to make it clear in his weird circular logic, his goal has been to reconstruct the liberal world order. I remember Glenn Beck did an interview with him. I don't know. It's been months now, probably 4 or 5 months ago. He did a little excuse me, a short interview with Donald Trump, and he asked him straight up. He goes, "Are you saying that what you're trying to do is to reshape the global world order, economically and through the power structures, because you feel like it has been detrimental to the well-being of the citizens of the United States?" And Donald Trump, he said, was basically, yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. So um, people don't report on those types of things, and they definitely don't report on those types of things in a fair way, characterize it fairly. Um, I can. That's part of why I'm so hesitant to say much of anything about the foreign policy of Donald Trump, is because I don't think I don't think where I'm coming from and with my knowledge of foreign policy, I'm not Scott Horton by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not Dave Smith by any stretch of the imagination. I don't feel like I have a good basis of understanding for what foreign policy could be, um, if it weren't the neoliberal post World War II world order. I don't have any basis of understanding of how it could look if not that. All my knowledge of foreign policy comes from the post World War II world order. So I've kind of been, I mean, pretty much hesitant. I haven't really like talked foreign policy in a long time because of that, because I don't have that basis of understanding. And if I don't fully understand what post World War One foreign policy was compared to post World War II foreign policy, I don't feel like it's fair for me to get involved and be like, well, it's isolationism, because I don't believe that's what it is. I look at isolationism very much different than what the mainstream would have you believe isolationism is. I don't believe it's non-interventionism either, which is what most libertarian foreign policy um, experts would be. Like Scott Horton is a non-interventionist. Um, I don't really, I mean, I consider myself pretty non-interventionist. I'm not extremely happy with this whole Venezuelan situation uh, for many different reasons, and we'll talk about those here in a minute. But I just want to explain to you like why I'm hesitant. I feel like foreign policy is a very nuanced thing. You're dealing with multiple different cultures, different leaders lead their countries in different ways due to the population of those nations. And I don't understand all those nations. I don't understand the best way to do business with all those nations. So it's hard for me to sit here and say, okay, well, they're definitely going to act this way, right? And we could take this at a micro level. I can say that if I go to do business with a trucking company in Texas, I know how trucking companies in Texas operate. I understand trucking companies in Texas. But let's say I take my experience of trucking in Texas and I try to do business with a container facility in Seattle. I'm not going to have a basis of understanding of exactly how that container facility in Seattle operates. There might be a lot of similarities to the way that trucking operates in Texas, but it's not going to be identical. And so then even though I'm going from one logistics field to another section of that logistics field, it doesn't mean I'm going to have a full understanding. So when you're looking at like the way that Trump negotiates with Russia or he negotiates with the EU or NATO, I don't have like a real strong understanding of the worldview that the EU, NATO, or Russia are coming from. I've been to Germany. I know that the people in Germany are close enough to us that I can go to Germany for let's say a week and have a good time and not have any issues. I know people from Britain. I understand that we're similar enough in cultures to where I can spend time with my friends from Britain and not have any issues. But I can't sit here and tell you what the formal worldview, the formal culture of that nation is in which their government would operate in order to keep the entirety of the nation at ease, right? so so when Donald Trump is going in to negotiate with Putin, I kind of cut him some slack. I'm like, well, I don't understand the the aspect, the worldview of the Russian people. I've met Russians, like I met like one or two Russians over my years, and they were extremely nice people. But other than that, I don't know much about Russians. I don't know anything about Russia other than the pictures I've seen of it are beautiful. That's it. That's all I know. Like I can't tell you. Um, I've read some Dugan, but that does not give me the worldview of Alexander Dugan. I haven't lived the life of Alexander Dugan, right? That just gives me a perspective as what he looks at when he's looking at political philosophy. So So I just want to make that clear that I'm not here to defend Trump and I'm not here to slam Trump. I have, there are things that I think are failures and I think there are things that are successes. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you some sort of analysis as to the information I've been able to find on this strike and on the arrest of Maduro. If you go listen to the left, oh my God, he kidnaps Maduro. Well, no, Trump did not go in and kidnap Maduro. There is an arrest warrant out. It is legal under the United States federal law what Donald Trump did. You can like that, you can dislike that. What Donald Trump did under U.S. federal law is legal. So up to this point, now we may get into some gray areas here. One of the things that Trump said that, well, let's start here. I'm glad Maduro's gone. In 2008, 2016, Maduro stole the election and utilized his cartel and the military to enforce his reign continue. So I'm glad he's gone. They did steal oil wells and the infrastructure for the oil facilities that the U.S. companies had built down there in Venezuela. And the U.S. oil companies were doing business with Venezuela. Then Maduro came to power and he seized them, and they're all in disrepair and they're not producing the amount of oil or wealth for the people of Venezuela that could be produced. I understand that. There's a reason that The citizens of Venezuela have been eating dogs and rats and cats, and there's no food in the grocery stores. Like, we've known about this for years. The socialist program doesn't work. So I'm glad Maduro's gone. Do I necessarily appreciate how that happened? No, I have my own. I don't know if I can't say it's not the best way to for it to happen because of how quickly it was. It wasn't like a the hunt for bin Laden type deal, where you know exactly where he's at, but you're not going to go get him, which is um, a huge complaint of U.S. foreign policy in Afghanistan. Was they knew from the get-go they could have bin Laden, and they rejected all the offers that came their way of the Taliban taking him into custody and handing him over to the U.S. They knew where he was, and they didn't just go straight in and get him. They went in and they overthrew this entire nation that was already living in dire straits and just turned it into a complete quagmire. So, am I happy that the United States did not enter Venezuela from the north and just march down the streets of Caracas, killing everybody with a firearm? Well, yeah, there's at least something to be said about the precision and accuracy in which the United States conducted this exercise. And I'll read y'all something here in a little bit from an Intel analyst that will kind of break down some of these things and what the U.S. accomplished in this. Um, do I don't like the idea of the U.S. Governing Venezuela, whether they're working with Maduro's vice president and working with the Venezuelan military or not. It just doesn't seem like a good idea. That seems like a really poor conceived idea of how to assist the Venezuelan people. I do understand wanting to offer the security for the American countries that companies that are going down into Venezuela to rebuild the oil infrastructure. So I do kind of get that. I don't know if they could have worked with like military contractors. I don't know if there was going to be the operation of military contractors. Donald Trump kind of he did the weave around the whole idea of boots on the ground. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. That's going to be something we see later on and kind of get a conception of how that's going to operate. We don't really know how these things are going to operate. And that's one thing Donald Trump, as much as people say the dude can't keep his mouth shut and he just says the first thing, he's pretty good about keeping his cards close to his chest when he needs to. When it comes to making deals, when it comes to strikes like this, the strikes on Soleimani, the strikes on an Iranian nuclear facility, he's very good about keeping his cards close to his chest. And he seems to be able to stick with, he has this, because he's a businessman and he looks at everything through the art of a deal. Everything is a negotiation. He looks at military force as a tool of negotiation in order to reach his his goal, his ultimate goal. So he's pretty good about like utilizing the military force, showing, hey, this is just one strike. This is just one capability of United States military might. And you don't want to push us any further. If you push us any further, then it can get a lot worse. And that's what he was saying during the press conference. We had a second wave planned. We didn't have to use the second wave. So, thankfully, I haven't heard any reports that any civilians were injured or killed in this bombardment of Venezuela and the capturing of Maduro and bringing Maduro to justice. Um, if it if it slows if it slows or stops the flow of human trafficking and drugs up into the United States and from the United States, um, it could turn out to be an ultimate good. We just don't have all the evidences of that. That's going to be something that we see over years. That's not going to be something that we find out today or tomorrow. That's going to take time to really see what the impact of this move was. So, I hope for the people of Venezuela this turns out well for them, that the money that the U.S. is able to generate through the oil industry in Venezuela does make them wealthy and does improve their way of life, and reemergent middle class comes into Venezuela, and the people of Venezuela can live in their own nation amongst their own people in a comfortable manner. I truly mean that. Now, whether that whether that is the end result or not, well, that's yet to be seen. We know that South Africa, I mean, not South Africa. See, I talk and think about South Africa so much that I just automatically say we know that the countries in South America have a long history of coups and military occupation and Pinochet, throwing people out of helicopters, the CIA's involvement down there in the region, and we'll see if Trump's ultimate plan of global upheaval and reconstructing the world order and reinstituting a more nationalist style of governance worldwide is actually effective or not, or if we were better under the liberal world order. I guess we will find out. One thing it's always been that's been difficult for me to wrap my mind around um, is the fact that might makes right. That is something I just have trouble with. I don't like it, and this comes from the writing of Thucydides and Million Dialogue. He says the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. He said this. The breakdown says this reflects the idea that in international relations, power dynamics dictate outcomes, where the strong impose their will on the weak without regard for justice. It illustrates a fundamental principle of political realism, emphasizing that might often prevails over right. And that is something that, when you look at the world, if you look at the world through the lens of fairness, justice, and morality, this just sounds completely awful. But when you look through the lens of realpolitik, you have to understand that this is the way the world has always operated. This is the structure of society. The structure of empire has always been this, right? So when we were talking about South Africa, let's take for instance South Africa. Like, what was Donald Trump's problem with South Africa? Well, it was injustice as he saw it. This is what Donald Trump and South Africa have been fighting about since since their visits. Well, since Donald Trump came into office, right? So South Africa has BEE laws, Black Economic Empowerment laws, that were put into place in like 1993, I want to say, is when they were signed into place. And these Black Economic Empowerment laws originally were to like affirmative action laws. They were like, look, like this apartheid regime that y'all had, no matter what you were trying to do with it, what it ultimately did, what the outcomes ultimately were, was that black people were disadvantaged unfairly and white people were propped up unfairly. So, in order to make it a little bit more fair, we're going to have to put some affirmative action laws similar to what the United States have into place in order to pull the black citizenship out of the ghetto, so to speak. So they instituted the BEE laws, and the expectation that was given by Thabo Mbeki was that these laws were going to be temporary, that they were only going to exist for a short while in order to get more the economy flowing more in the townships and throughout the black areas, the Zulu areas, the Sutu areas, and the Xhosa areas, and that once the economy began to work for everyone equally, then these laws would be uh, eradicated. Well, everybody knows that nothing is more permanent than a temporary government solution. So what has happened since then is black economic empowerment has taken on a different form, and more things have been instituted and added to the law, including giving up, like let's say you're Elon Musk, for example. You're an American citizen. You see that there is labor in South Africa. The unemployment rate is 37%. There is labor to be utilized in South Africa. So you're like, look, I can open a Tesla plant in South Africa, put thousands of South Africans to work, and help raise these people out of poverty. And what the BEE law says, well, yes, you can do that. But in order to do that, you have to sign over anywhere from 25 to 51% of your company to an approved black business owner. So this leads to corruption. This leads to favors within the political organization and corruption, because what they're doing is they're not sending people that are qualified to operate a Tesla facility to Elon Musk to work with Elon Musk in the transition and coming over to South Africa and learning how to set up a plant in South Africa. No, they're sending over political aligned, ideologically aligned people in to Elon Musk and saying, you're going to sign over certain percentage of your company over to this person, or you cannot open a plant in South Africa. So Elon Musk says, well, you've done nothing for my company. I don't, you have no experience working in this field. You bring nothing to the table. So no, I'll go open the plant in Indonesia or in India or China, where I can open it and not have all these restrictions on who is in operation and works within my organization. So it ultimately hurts the people at the bottom, the people that could have had jobs and been pulling themselves out of despair. They're punished because Ramaphosa can't give his buddy $1 billion deal with Elon Musk. You also have the expropriation without compensation law. So this law flies in the face of the South African Constitution that was put into place at the end of apartheid. The apartheid, or the DA government at that time, made a deal with the ANC and said, look, if we're going to hand over power, we need to put a constitution in place to protect the Afrikaner and the Englishman. We can't be dealing with, a situation where, like, similar to Zimbabwe. We're not gonna have this. So they wrote a constitution. One of the major amendments to or not amendments, but one of the major clauses within the Constitution is you're going to leave our land alone. You're not taking our land from our farmers, from our people. This land has been developed for hundreds of years. It has been within families for hundreds of years. You're not going to take it from us. This is our land. This represents our culture and what we've built. So the ANC agreed to this. Well, now they came out with this, and Cyril Ramaphosa signed the law last year, well, 2024, I think in November of 2024. So in South Africa, the way it works is if the prime minister or president of the country signs a law into place, the parliament has 30 days to reject the law. So what he did is he signed the law, and then 45 days later, he said, "Oh yeah, this law is in effect." So now the parliament had no option to kick the law out, which they probably would have done. They probably would have rejected the law because it flies in the face of the Constitution. So now the Cyril Ramaphosa is having to deal with the South African Supreme Court to see if this law can even stand. But anyway, So that was another thing. So now you're expropriating private property from people based upon their race and handing it over to people based upon their race. Well, this flies in the face of American laws and the way America does business. So Donald Trump got really pissed off about this. It was like, you can't do this. You can't just take people's land and give it to other people based upon your perceived injustices. People that had nothing to do with apartheid, people that are farmers today that weren't involved in apartheid, didn't construct the laws, didn't do anything, just worked the land that was handed down to them through generations, and you're going to steal their land from them and hand it over to people that don't know how to work the land. You're not only going to rob people of property rights, but you're also going to end up starving your own people because you're going to hand over the land to people that don't know how to farm and don't know how to work the farms, don't have the experience. This wasn't even in the law. There was no part of the law that says we are going to make sure that the farms stay up and operational, and that we're going to take the farms from the white people and hand it over to equally qualified black people. That wasn't part of it. No, it's just like, we're just going to give it to somebody. Okay, and then what? Is this person going to know how to work the land and grow the crops and make sure that your country doesn't starve? So this is a major issue. And then you had Trump finally said, okay, enough's enough. We're going to put sanctions on members of the ANC. We're going to cut off aid to South Africa, and we're going to take Afrikaners, coloreds, or Indians, which are the minorities in South Africa. We're going to offer them refugee status in the United States. And some coloreds and some Indians have come on this refugee program. So I think it was in September, the South African government decided, you know what? We don't like this refugee program. We're going to send in South African police into this refugee center to harass the employees of the refugee center. And they utilized these Kenyan workers that were working with this refugee program. They utilized them as an excuse to invade this refugee center. So Donald Trump and South Africa have been playing tit for tat. And then so this was when, after the United States said, "Oh, well, we're not coming to the G20. We're not sending anybody to South Africa. You're being disrespectful. You're not working with us. We're not going to send anybody to the G20 in South Africa this year." They raided this place. Donald Trump said, "Okay, then you're not invited to the G20 next year in Miami." So there's this tit for tat going on. Who's got more force? But anyway, so this is how the power dynamics of a nation operate against its people, right? So the ANC government has the power. The Afrikaner is powerless. So the ANC goes in and takes their land, takes parts of their business, redistributes their wealth. Because ultimately, the ANC is and always will be communist. They are a communist government. They were trained by the Soviets. So Donald Trump sees that and he goes, "Well, you're flexing your power dynamic. The might makes right within your borders. But what happens when an outside force that is more powerful than you flexes their muscles and penalizes you for penalizing the weak?" So ultimately, that's what Donald Trump looks at when he looked at Maduro. He said, "Yeah, you're doing all this stuff within your borders, and you think you can just run drugs everywhere. Your people can traffic children and do all these illegal, inhumane things. But what happens when the bigger power comes in from the outside and shows you that, no, it's not okay. We're not going to accept that." So that's what we're kind of dealing with here. We're dealing with a human rights violator, a human trafficker, a drug trafficker, a socialist, a communist, a man that showed no um, sign of stepping out of power when he lost an election and instead rejecting the loss of the election. I think that all the estimates I've seen in the 2024 election, his opponent received 68% of the vote. He didn't even win one province in Venezuela. And because he had control of the military and he had control of the cartels, he was able to just say, nah, you're not taking power. So then how is it that we are to deal with this? Are we to allow the Venezuelan people to remain under the thumb of a communist dictator who is starving them, trafficking their children, and committing these human rights violations? Or does the United States, as um, a global superpower, have the not not only authority but the responsibility to do something about it? And that's what it ultimately boils down to. That's what when you look at it and you're like, man, this could be really good for the Venezuelan people, and I hope it turns out really well for the Venezuelan people. At the same time, what gives Donald Trump the right to go kick in the door of the Venezuelan government and remove the illegitimate president of Venezuela? And it's one of those things, man. You're constantly fighting these nuances and these different competing ideas within your mind when it comes to stuff like this. Like, let's take Iran for instance. Now the talk is this has sent a warning shot over the bows of Iran, correct? And people are talking, well, now the Trump administration is going to go overthrow the Ayatollah. Okay, maybe. Uh, I don't think that's the best idea, um, for a variety of reasons, but maybe that's what happens. So over the last couple of weeks in Iran, there have been major protests in the streets of Tehran. Last I saw, I think I read 2 days ago, yesterday or 2 days ago, that 10 of the protesters have been killed by Iranian military, and that they're planning on continuing to open fire on protests until the protests disperse because the Ayatollah doesn't like the visuals. So you have a regime in Iran that is conducting its power dynamics within its borders in an inhumane way, and you have a power structure outside of Iran saying, if you do not treat your people in a specific way, then we are going to send in our people to force you to treat your people in this way. And it turns into this quagmire. And you end up with, coups and revolutions and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, especially when you go into nations you do not understand. You don't understand the culture. You don't understand the religion. You don't understand the dynamics of how the nation operates. Now, if you listen to Patrick Bet-David, I assume the at least what I gather from his, because he's Iranian. Um, his family escaped the Ayatollah regime when he was a child, and he grew up in America and made himself wealthy. Became a multi millionaire. And his thing is, well, before the Iranian Revolution in the 70s that overthrew the Shah, the life was better in Iran than it has been under the Ayatollah. The problem is when you start involving yourselves in these dynamics, especially in different religious cultures like Islam, You don't know how you don't know how dedicated the fundamentalist Muslims are to the idea of a political leader that is also their religious leader, like the Ayatollah, and the implementation of Sharia law on the public. And if that split, let's say like 60% of the people want to live in a liberal style democracy similar to America or similar to Israel, or just pick any, Western democracy. So 60% of the people want to live that way, but 40% of the people are Islamic fundamentalists that want to implement Sharia law. Well, who's going to have a more militant mindset? The religious fundamentalist or the live and let live guy? And so the religious fundamentalists are going to overrun the live and let live people every single time because they're fighting for a purpose larger than themselves. So it's very dangerous involving United States military in these types of scenarios. It's very dangerous not only to the U.S. military, not only to the U.S. citizenship, due to possible terrorist attacks, but also to the people of Iran. Because when that revolution comes 15 years down the road, and those Islamic fundamentalists have gotten themselves, strategically situated in order to overthrow the more secularized government, the people in the middle are the ones that get hurt. The people in the streets are the ones that get hurt. The people just living their everyday lives are the ones that suffer at the hands of the terrorists. And so it's not necessarily it, it would I mean I can't I wouldn't even be able to think of a scenario in which it would take and that it would stay, that you wouldn't have another 73 style revolution in Iran. I think it was 73 um in Iran, in which the Shah would be overthrown and another Ayatollah be put into place. I can't even fathom a scenario where that might be possible. So that would be the one thing that I would say might stop the Trump administration from implementing something like that. Now, I could see a similar situation as what took place in Venezuela taking place in Colombia and Cuba, right? Trump made it very clear. We want our neighbors. We want good neighbors. We don't want these thugs. We don't want these drug dealers. We don't want these human traffickers. We don't want these socialists, these communists starving their people. Like, we want good neighbors. We don't want cartels. We're looking to clean up the streets of our neighborhood. Similar to sending in the National Guard into DC or sending in the National Guard in New Orleans. He's looking at cleaning up the streets, limiting the ability of these nations to implement these these mafioso style rules upon their people. All right. So I wanted to get to this. I thought this was super interesting. I read this earlier. It's a little long, but I think it's worth the read. It's by Shanaka Anselm Pereira. The Delta Doctrine: How 150 Minutes over Caracas Redrew the Map of Global Power. The Strategic Intelligence Analysis of Operation Sovereign Eclipse, the Restoration of American Hemispheric Supremacy, and the Dawn of the No Rules Era. Which he says the dawn of the no rules era. I said we have always been in a no rules era, right? People want to point to the international law. Well, who controls international law? Might makes right. The strongest do. That's why the U.S. has never been convicted of penalty under international law. That's why Israel will never be convicted of penalty under international law, because the International Committee only has the power that the most powerful nation will grant it. So it's always been a no rules order, or it's been an American rules order, is another way you could say it. Now, again, part of what I don't like is I don't like that I mean, the major thing I don't like is the idea of American government governing Venezuela. What are we going back to the days of the British Empire, where instead of creating empire through, cozy relationships with the dictators around the world and putting in, Pinochet's and Saddam Hussein's and these types of leaders in the world, you just occupy and colonize the nations? Is that what it's going to turn into? It's very possible. I don't like that idea. I don't think it's good for um, U.S. sovereignty. And I think it could backfire horribly on the U.S. But from an intel analysis perspective, let's see how do you say his name? Shanaka Anselm Pereira has to say about what happened in Venezuela. In the early hours of January 3rd, 2026, reports indicate that EA-18G Growler jamming pods activated somewhere over the Caribbean. What happened in the minutes that followed will be studied in war colleges for the next century. What it means will reshape global strategy for the next generation. The capture of Nicolas Maduro represents far more than the removal of a narco dictator. It represents the crystallization of a new doctrine of American power that the world has not seen since the height of the Cold War. It represents the categorical humiliation of Russian military technology and Chinese strategic investment. It represents the final answer to the question that has haunted international relations since the disastrous withdrawals from Kabul. Does America still have the will to act? The answer arrived on rotors in the darkness above Caracas. To understand why this operation constitutes perhaps the most significant geopolitical event since the fall of the Berlin Wall, one must first understand what actually happened, then understand what it means, and finally understand what comes next. The implications cascade across every domain of international relations, from the credibility of Russian arms exports to the viability of Chinese Belt and Road investments. From the legal architecture of American power projection to the very definition of sovereignty in the 21st century. From the future of the Iranian regime to the calculus of every dictator who believed great power patronage could shield them from American justice. This is not merely the story of how Delta Force captured a dictator with zero American casualties. This is the story of how a second Trump administration, dismissed by European capitals and mocked by the foreign policy establishment, executed the most decisive assertion of American hemispheric dominance since Theodore Roosevelt sent the Great White Fleet around the world. And it is the story of how that assertion sent a message that reverberated not just through Caracas and Moscow and Beijing, but through Tehran, where the regime that has defied American pressure for 4 decades now confronts the question, are we next? The chattering classes will debate the legality for years. The historians will argue about proportionality for decades. But the dictators of the world understood the message instantly. The United States is back, and it is not asking for permission. The anatomy of operational perfection. The operation that President Trump announced via Truth Social in the early morning hours of January 3rd was not improvised. It was the culmination of 5 months of patient escalation, beginning with Operation Southern Spear in August 2025 and the naval blockade that followed. But the specific execution revealed a level of planning and coordination that demands analysis. The strike package launched from the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group positioned in the Caribbean. The composition tells the story of American technological supremacy, F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters providing air dominance and surgical strike capabilities, FA-18 Super Hornets for conventional strike and air-to-air backup, EA-18G Growlers for electronic attack and radar suppression, and EC-130H Compass Call aircraft for communications jamming and psychological operations support. The electronic prelude. What made the rapid timeline possible was not kinetic superiority alone. It was the invisible war that preceded the visible one. Intelligence sources indicate that U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency had been conducting preparatory operations against Venezuelan military networks for weeks prior to the raid. The Venezuelan military's command and control systems, already degraded by years of corruption and brain drain, were systematically mapped and targeted. When the Growlers activated their ALQ-99 jamming pods at H hour, they were not conducting blind suppression. They were executing precision electronic attack against radar and communications nodes whose vulnerabilities had already been cataloged. The EC-130H Compass Call aircraft, operating from undisclosed positions, jammed Venezuelan military communications across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. Unit commanders could not contact their headquarters. Air defense batteries could not receive targeting data from acquisition radars. Fighter pilots could not receive scramble orders. The Venezuelan military was not merely suppressed, it was blinded, deafened, and paralyzed. This explains why the S-300 VM batteries, theoretically capable of engaging targets at 250 kilometers, appear never to have activated. This explains why the BUK M2E systems, designed to provide medium-range air defense, were reportedly destroyed on the ground without illuminating targets. This explains why the Su-30 Mk2 fighters never got airborne. The electronic warfare campaign had already won the battle before the first helicopter crossed the coast. Excuse me, my nose is still just congesting on me. Primary targets formed a strategic pentagram around the capital, Fuerte Tiuna, Venezuela's largest military complex and the nerve center of regime power to the south. La Carlota Air Base, the primary aviation facility in Caracas. To the east, La Guara Port, cutting off potential maritime escape. To the north, El Volcan Communications Facility, severing command and control to the west, with secondary strikes in Miranda and Aragua states closing potential retreat corridors. The geometry was not accidental. It was designed to collapse the regime's response options simultaneously. The suppression of enemy air defenses campaign achieved what military theorists call a perfect score. Venezuela possessed one of the most formidable integrated air defense systems in Latin America, 12 S-300 VM and anti-2500 launchers representing Russia's premier long-range surface-to-air missile system with theoretical engagement ranges of 250 kilometers. 9 batteries of BUK M2E medium-range missiles capable of engaging targets at 45 kilometers. Multiple Pechora 2M short-range systems for point defense, and a squadron of Su-30 Mk2 Flanker G air superiority fighters. None of it mattered. Open source intelligence imagery confirms a destroyed BUK M2E launcher at La Carlota Air Base. Video analysis by Tyler Rogaway of the War Zone verified MH-47G Chinooks of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, operating freely over Venezuelan airspace. Russian military commentator Oleg Sarov, watching the same footage, offered perhaps the most devastating assessment. The video shows the actual absence of working air defense system. Fox News reported that Venezuela initially did not notice the U.S. strikes because response systems were disabled and air defense systems did not return fire. This was not a suppression campaign. This was annihilation. The entire Venezuelan IADS was rendered irrelevant in the opening minutes of the operation, allowing Delta Force operators to conduct their mission as if they were on a training exercise in the Nevada desert. The insertion itself demonstrated textbook precision. CBS News confirmed that operators from 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta conducted the capture. Zero American casualties. The president of Venezuela and his wife captured and extracted. The largest and most heavily defended nation in the Caribbean basin penetrated, neutralized, and exited before dawn. This is what American special operations capability looks like when employed with presidential will and strategic clarity. The legal architecture of American action. Critics will fixate on legality. They always do. But the legal framework undergirding Operation Sovereign Eclipse represents a sophisticated innovation in American power projection that deserves analysis rather than reflexive condemnation. Okay, excuse me for 1 second. If I can just pause here. Where's my damn pause? Mute my view profile. Blah, blah, blah. Stop video. No. Okay, where's my damn pause button here? Ah, here we go. Pause. More pause. Pause. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I had to go get a cough drop because the congestion is just forming behind my eyes, and as I'm reading, it's actually making me feel a little dizzy. So, ugh, you know, this crud sucks, man. But as we were, okay. The DOJ speaks. Attorney General Pam Bondi's statement, released hours after the operation, framed the action in language that will define how history remembers this moment. Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have been indicted in the Southern District of New York. Nicolas Maduro has been charged with narco terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices against the United States. They will soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. This is not the language of international relations. This is the language of criminal prosecution, Bondi continued. On behalf of the entire US DOJ, I would like to thank President Trump for having the courage to demand accountability on behalf of the American people. And a huge thank you to our brave military who conducted the incredible and highly successful mission to capture these two alleged international narco traffickers. The framing is precise and intentional. Maduro is not a head of state. He is an alleged international narco trafficker. The operation was not an act of war. It was a highly successful mission to capture indicted criminals. The legal architecture transforms what international law would characterize as an armed attack into what American law characterizes as the enforcement of a valid arrest warrant against designated terrorists. The legal foundation. The foundation was laid on March 26, 2020, when the Southern District of New York unsealed a superseding indictment charging Nicolas Maduro Moros with narco terrorism conspiracy carrying a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence, cocaine importation conspiracy, and weapons offenses carrying a 30-year mandatory minimum. The indictment named co-defendants including Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez, Interior Minister Dia Diosdado Cabello, and former intelligence chief Hugo Carvajal. This was not a political gesture. This was the construction of legal architecture. The critical escalation came on November 24th, 2025, when the State Department designated the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization. Federal Register document 2025-20750 explicitly named Maduro as the head of the organization. This designation transformed the legal calculus entirely. Under the FTO framework, any person providing material support to the organization becomes criminally liable. And any action against the organization's leadership falls under the expansive authorities granted to the executive for counterterrorism operations. The Washington Post reported on a classified Office of Legal Counsel memorandum from summer 2025 concluding that personnel executing strikes on designated drug trafficking organizations would not be exposed to future prosecution. Senator Mike Lee, initially skeptical, reversed his position after a briefing from Secretary of State Rubio, stating that the kinetic action deployed to protect those executing arrest warrant likely falls within President's inherent Article 2 authority. The triple anniversary, January 3rd. The timing carries weight that transcends coincidence. January 3rd has become, through deliberate American action, the date that defines the limits of sovereignty for those who defy Washington. On January 3rd, 1990, Manuel Noriega surrendered to American forces in Panama after Operation Just Cause. The federal court that tried him in United States versus Noriega denied head of state immunity because the United States never recognized Noriega as Panama's legitimate leader. Drug trafficking was deemed commercial activity outside the scope of legitimate statecraft, thus not protected by sovereign immunity. On January 3rd, 2020, exactly 30 years later, an American MQ-9 Reaper drone fired Hellfire missiles at a convoy leaving Baghdad International Airport, killing Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force. Soleimani was arguably the second most powerful figure in Iran, architect of Iranian influence across the Middle East, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American service members. The strike was conducted under Article 2 authority, justified as preemptive action against an imminent threat, enabled by the 2002 Iraq AUMF. On January 3rd, 2026, exactly 6 years after Soleimani and 36 years after Noriega, Delta Force captured Nicolas Maduro. The message is unmistakable. This date is now marked in the calendars of every hostile regime on earth. The Noriega template works. The Soleimani precedent lives, and January 3rd has become the anniversary of American will. The parallel is precise and intentional. The United States recognizes Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia, currently in exile in Spain, as Venezuela's rightful president following the disputed July 2024 election. The U.S. government has never recognized Maduro's January 2025 inauguration. Accordingly, Maduro enjoys no head of state immunity in American courts and any more than Noriega did. The Noriega template works. It worked in 1990. The Soleimani template works. It worked in 2020. Both templates worked on January 3rd, 2026, and they will work again. The no rules doctrine. The uncomfortable truth that critics cannot say aloud, but that practitioners understand implicitly, is that the Venezuela operation represents not an aberration, but a clarification. The rules-based international order, to the extent it ever existed as constraint on American power, has been revealed as aspirational fiction. Analyst Alex Christoforou, commenting on the operation, articulated what diplomats cannot. Countries around the world need to realize that the world we live in today, there are no rules. Decapitation strikes are definitely on the table. Kidnapping military leaders is on the table. As far as the Trump administration goes, there are no rules. They will do whatever they need to do to win. This is not criticism, it is description. The no rules characterization will horrify international lawyers and foreign policy establishmentarians who invested careers in the framework of multilateral institutions and treaty obligations and customary international law. But it accurately describes the operational reality that sophisticated practitioners have always understood. International law constrains the weak, not the strong. The UN charter matters when the Security Council agrees and when enforcement mechanisms exist. When neither condition obtains, international law provides only a vocabulary for diplomatic protest. The strong will do what they must, what they can, and the weak will suffer what they must. That's what he's saying. What has changed is not the underlying reality, but the willingness to state it explicitly. Previous administrations maintained the fiction that American power operated within legal constraints, even as they stretched those constraints beyond recognition. The current administration dispenses with the fiction. The result is not lawlessness, but clarity. Adversaries now understand precisely what they face. The emerging doctrine. The Delta Doctrine, as it will come to be known, rests on several operational principles that the Venezuela operation exemplifies. First, legal predicates will be constructed to provide domestic justification for action. The FTO designation, the narco terrorism indictment, the non recognition of hostile governments create the legal architecture within which American forces operate. These predicates may not satisfy international law, but they satisfy American law, which is what matters for American courts and American service members. Second, congressional authorization will be avoided where possible. The House rejected a war powers resolution by a margin of 210 to 216 in December 2025. The Senate voted 51-48 against the Kane-Schiff resolution. Congress is scheduled to return from recess on January 6th, meaning Maduro will already be in American custody before the first committee hearing can convene. He's already in New York. I believe they landed yesterday afternoon. The template is designed to present Congress with fait accompli. Third, allied consultation will be minimal or absent. This was a unilateral American operation, no coalition, no consultation, no diplomatic cover. Pure assertion of American power. The European Union's tepid statement, Spain's call for de escalation, the UK's carefully hedged response reveal allies presented with outcomes rather than options. Fourth, international institutions will be ignored where unhelpful. The UN Security Council will meet. Russia and China will condemn. Nothing will happen. American veto power precludes binding action against American interests. Fifth, operations will be executed with overwhelming force to minimize American casualties and maximize speed, presenting adversaries and critics alike with irreversible outcomes. The rapid timeline was not incidental, it was essential. By the time the world understood what was happening, it had already happened. The international response confirms the doctrine. The international response to Operation Sovereign Eclipse validates rather than refutes the no rules thesis. Consider the pattern. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, the government of Spain is closely monitoring the events in Venezuela. Our embassy and consulates are operational. We call for de escalation and responsibility. International law and principles of the United Nations Charter must be respected. This is the sound of a NATO ally acknowledging reality while maintaining rhetorical fidelity to norms if it knows are unenforceable. The European Union statement acknowledged that Maduro lacks legitimacy, while affirming principles of international law and UN Charter must be respected. The contradiction is the point. The EU simultaneously accepts the premise of American action, Maduro is illegitimate, while objecting to the method, military force. This is not opposition. This is accommodation dressed as principle. Russia condemned the act of armed aggression and demanded Security Council meetings, but Russia is consumed by Ukraine and possesses no capacity to respond. Russian condemnation without Russian capability is background noise. China demanded respect for sovereignty and non interference, but China could not protect its most important Latin American partner despite $60 billion in investment and a high level diplomatic visit 18 hours before the capture. Chinese condemnation without Chinese action is acknowledgement of limitation. Iran condemned the military attack as violation of sovereignty, but Iran is watching not from a position of moral authority, but from a position of existential concern. If the template works in Caracas, why not Tehran? The pattern is consistent: rhetorical objection, practical accommodation. This is how the international system processes American power when that power is exercised with speed and decisiveness. The rules bend around the reality. The humiliation of Russian arms. The strategic implications of Operation Sovereign Eclipse extend far beyond Latin America. Perhaps no aspect of the operation carries greater consequences for global power dynamics than the comprehensive failure of Russian air defense systems. Russia has spent 2 decades marketing the S 300 and S 400 family of surface to air missiles as the antidote to American and NATO air power. Moscow has sold billions of dollars of these systems to China, India, Turkey, Iran, Algeria, and numerous other nations on the premise that they can defend stealth aircraft, cruise missiles, and tactical aviation. Venezuela represented a showcase for Russian military technology in America's own hemisphere. The S 300 VM anti 2500 system, marketed as capable of engaging tactical ballistic missiles and stealth aircraft at ranges up to 250 kilometers. The BUK M2E, one of Russia's most advanced medium range systems with phased array fire control radar integrated with modern command and control networks. On the night of January 3rd, 2026, these systems accomplished precisely nothing. The failure mechanisms are devastating for Russian credibility. American EA 18G Growler electronic attack aircraft operating from the Gerald R. Ford succeeded in degrading or defeating the entire Venezuelan surveillance and fire control radar network. The EC 130H Compass Call aircraft jammed communications, preventing coordinated response. F 35 Lightning II aircraft penetrated Venezuelan airspace without detection or engagement. The BUK M2E battery at La Carlota was destroyed on the ground. Its 9S-36 phased array radar dark, its missiles still in their rails. You got to wonder how much of this was also a shot across the bow at Russia, because Trump is getting tired of the Ukraine war and Russia not being honest in its negotiations. Why Venezuelan air defense failed. The comprehensive failure demands explanation beyond American technological superiority. The answer lies in the degradation that precedes defeat. Venezuelan air defense systems suffered from maintenance collapse before American forces arrived. More than half of long range surveillance radars were reportedly inoperable due to spare part shortages, sanctions driven supply chain disruption, excuse me, and systematic corruption and diverted maintenance budgets. The brain drain that afflicted every Venezuelan institution had devastated the technical cadre required to operate sophisticated Russian equipment. Operators trained in Moscow years ago had immigrated. Their replacements lacked both training and experience. This degradation pattern matters because it illuminates vulnerability. Russian systems require Russian support. When that support is disrupted by sanctions or diplomatic isolation, the systems degrade. When operators lack training, the systems underperform. When maintenance lapses, the system fails. Venezuela demonstrated that Russian air defense is not merely defeatable by American electronic warfare, it is defeatable by time and isolation. The global arms market implications. Russia has exported S 300, S 400 family systems to China for over $3 billion, India for $5.4 billion, Turkey for $2.5 billion, with pending sales to Iran, Algeria for over $1 billion, Egypt, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and others. Oh, excuse me. Nose is itching now. The total addressable market over the next decade exceeds 40 to $50 billion. The Venezuela demonstration effect threatens 15 to 25% of projected sales. The performance of Russian air defense systems in Ukraine had already raised questions. The inability to consistently engage Ukrainian drones and Western supplied precision weapons suggested limitations. But the complete failure in Venezuela against the sophisticated American SEAD-EW campaign employing the latest electronic attack capabilities eliminates any remaining ambiguity. The implications ripple outward. India operates the S 400 as its premier air defense system. Iran has negotiated for the S 400 for years. Algeria has deployed Russian systems across its territory. Saudi Arabia has considered Russian alternatives to American THAAD and Patriot systems. Every one of these nations is now reconsidering. The arithmetic is merciless. Russia has earned approximately $4 to $5 billion from arms sales to Venezuela alone. The global market for Russian air defense systems represents tens of billions more. A 15 to 25% decline in Russian arms exports over the next 2 years, which now appears conservative, would cost Moscow billions in hard currency at precisely the moment sanctions have constrained other revenue sources. President Putin built his foreign policy on the premise that Russia could project power through arms sales and security partnerships. That premise died over Caracas. China's strategic humiliation. If Russian, God damn it, if Russian military credibility suffered a fatal blow, Chinese strategic investment suffered an equally devastating setback. The timing of the operation was not coincidental. It was calculated humiliation. On January 2nd, 2026, approximately 18 hours before the strikes commenced, Xi Jinping's special envoy Q Zeki, I don't know, met with Nicolas Maduro at Miraflores Palace. The meeting reviewed 600 bilateral cooperation agreements. Chinese state media described Venezuela as an unwavering strategic partner. The delegation emphasized the deep bonds between Beijing and Caracas, the importance of the relationship to China's Latin American strategy, the billions invested in Venezuelan oil and infrastructure. 18 hours later, Delta Force operators captured Maduro and extracted him from Venezuelan territory. The message could not be clearer. Chinese diplomatic protection means nothing to America's hemisphere. Chinese investment buys no security. Chinese partnership offers no shield against American power. The $60 billion question. China Development Bank and China Exim Bank extended approximately $60 billion in loans to Venezuela between 2007 and 2017. The largest Chinese official finance commitment to any single country globally. Estimated outstanding debt ranges from 19 to $23 billion. Collateral consists of oil for loan arrangements delivering approximately 746,000 barrels per day to Chinese refineries. Recovery under a hostile successor regime, 40 to 60 cents on the dollar at best. Potential write down, $8 to $14 billion. The financial exposure compounds the strategic embarrassment. The regime change that Operation Sovereign Eclipse initiated creates immediate uncertainty about Chinese debt recovery. A new Venezuelan government, whether led by the opposition or by elements of the military seeking accommodation with Washington, will have every incentive to restructure Chinese obligations on terms favorable to Western creditors. Beijing may face a choice between accepting massive haircuts or seeing its claims subordinated to American-backed restructuring frameworks. The strategic dimension is equally damaging. China has invested heavily in Latin America over the past 2 decades, seeking to establish presence in America's traditional sphere of influence. Venezuela was the crown jewel of this strategy, an oil-rich nation explicitly hostile to Washington, willing to offer China military access and strategic resources. Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and other nations watched Chinese engagement with Venezuela to assess whether Beijing could be a genuine alternative to American partnership. The answer arrived in early hours of January 3rd, 2026. The pattern of impotence. This is not the first time Chinese strategic investment has failed to provide security to partners facing superior force. The June 2025 12-day war between Israel and Iran demonstrated the same pattern. Despite decades of partnership with Moscow and Beijing, Iran faced Israeli and American strikes on its nuclear facilities and air defense systems without meaningful assistance from either great power or patron. As the Christian Science Monitor reported, Iran relies on China and Russia. They didn't show up for its fight with Israel. Neither country provided military intervention. Neither country imposed costs on the attackers. Neither country did anything beyond rhetorical condemnation. The pattern is now established. Chinese and Russian patronage provides diplomatic cover, arms sales, economic investment, and rhetorical support. It does not provide security. When American or American aligned forces act, partners of Moscow and Beijing are on their own. Every nation in Latin America that has considered pivoting toward Beijing now understands the limits of that pivot. Every government that has welcomed Chinese investment now understands that such investment comes without security guarantees. Every leader who has entertained Chinese partnership now understands that when American resolve crystallizes, excuse me, God damn it, China can offer condemnation but not protection. The Monroe Doctrine lives, and it speaks with the rotor wash of Night Stalker helicopters. The sovereignty inversion. The international law professorate will produce endless papers condemning Operation Sovereign Eclipse as a violation of the UN Charter. They are technically correct and strategically irrelevant. Article 2.4 of the UN Charter prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The United States received no Security Council authorization. Venezuela launched no armed attack justifying Article 51 self-defense. International law expert Mark Weller of Chatham House stated correctly that short of UN Chapter 7 mandate, force is only lawful in response to armed attack or to prevent genocide. Clearly, none of these requirements were fulfilled. The UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights condemned the operation. The European Union issued tepid statements acknowledging that Maduro lacks legitimacy, while affirming principles of international law and UN Charter must be respected. Russia and China demanded Security Council meetings. None of this matters. The uncomfortable question: did the United States just commit an act of war against a sovereign nation? Most legal scholars would say yes. Abducting a head of state via military force in another country violates sovereignty under UN Charter Article 2.4. There was no UN authorization. There was no claim of self-defense. The closest precedent is Operation Just Cause, the 1989 Panama invasion to capture Manuel Noriega. In that operation drew widespread international condemnation. The U.S. position is more complicated. The Trump administration does not recognize Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate leader. Washington recognizes as Mundo Gonzalez Urrutia, I guess that's how you say his last name, as president-elect after the disputed 2024 election that Maduro allegedly rigged. From this perspective, Maduro is not a head of state. He is an indicted fugitive running a narco-terrorist regime. So which is it? A brazen violation of international law or the arrest of an indicted drug trafficker? The answer depends on where you sit. And increasingly, the only seat that matters is Washington. The new hierarchy of protection. The Westphalian Order, established by the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, rested on the principle that sovereignty was inherent and inviolable. Nations possess sovereignty by virtue of existence, protected by mutual recognition and the formal equality of states. This principle served European stability for centuries and was enshrined in the UN Charter as the organizing principle of international relations. The Westphalian sovereignty always contained a hidden assumption: enforcement. The principle of sovereign equality matters only to the extent that violations carry consequences. And the past 3 decades have demonstrated with increasing clarity that violations of sovereignty by great powers carry no meaningful consequences whatsoever. What Operation Sovereign Eclipse reveals is not the death of international law, but its transformation. Sovereignty is no longer inherent. It is contingent. And the conditions of that contingency have now been made explicit. The new sovereignty paradigm operates on a hierarchy of deterrence. Tier 1, nuclear deterrence. Absolute protection. North Korea, for all its provocations, remains untouchable because Pyongyang possesses deliverable nuclear warheads. Pakistan and Israel enjoy similar immunity. Nuclear weapons are the only reliable guarantee against American military action. Tier 2, Treaty Alliance, strong protection. NATO members and American treaty allies in Asia enjoy security guarantees that adversaries take seriously. Article 5 is credible. The U.S. Japan and U.S. North Korea alliances are credible. These commitments deter because they are backed by forward deployed forces and integrated command structures. Tier 3, great power patronage without treaty, weak protection. Russian and Chinese ties to Venezuela could not prevent American action. Moscow sold weapons, Beijing invested billions. Neither could provide security when American forces deployed. Iran discovered this in June 2025. This tier provides diplomatic support and economic partnership, but not military protection. Tier 4, international law alone, no protection. The UN Charter proved entirely irrelevant to the outcome in Caracas. Article 2.4 did not prevent the operation. The Security Council cannot compel American compliance. International law constrains only those who choose to be constrained or those too weak to resist. This hierarchy has always existed implicitly. What the Maduro capture makes explicit is that the United States will now act on this hierarchy openly, without apology, and without seeking permission from international institutions that lack enforcement capacity. International law is clear on paper. In practice, it tends to matter less when you are the one with 26,000 troops and the world's most powerful military. Legal or not, Maduro is in U.S. custody. The rest is just paperwork. Excuse me one second. The regional realignment. The capture of Maduro immediately clarified the ideological fault lines running through Latin America. Nations were forced to choose sides. Their choices revealed the true alignment of the hemisphere. President Javier Milei of Argentina responded first and most forcefully. La libertad avanza. Viva la libertad, carajo. Liberty advances, long live liberty. Milei had previously called the Maduro regime an atrocious and inhumane dictatorship and made no secret of his alignment with Washington. His response was not merely rhetorical support, it was a statement of civilizational allegiance. The contrast with the response from Bogota could not be sharper. President Gustavo Petro of Colombia, himself sanctioned by the United States in October 2025, declared, "They are currently bombing Caracas. Alert the whole world." He ordered military deployment to the Venezuelan border and demanded emergency meetings of the Organization of American States and United Nations. Petro's response reveals the deeper stakes of the operation. Colombia shares a 1,370-mile border with Venezuela. Petro, a former guerrilla leader and committed leftist, understands that the template established in Caracas could apply to any government Washington deems unacceptable. His alarm is not merely ideological solidarity with a fallen comrade. It is existential fear about his own position. Cuba's response was equally predictable and equally revealing. President Miguel Diaz-Canel declared the operation state terrorism against brave Venezuelan people and against our America. Patria o muerte, venceremos, whatever, homeland or death. They just need to speak English like normal people. Homeland or death, we shall overcome. The Castro regime, survivor of countless American attempts at removal, watches with particular attention. If the template works in Caracas, why not Havana? Brazil offered muted concern. President Lula da Silva expressed worry about Trump's attitudes towards Latin America, but stopped short of outright condemnation. This reflects Brazil's complex position, nominally aligned with the left populist project, but economically integrated with Washington and unwilling to sacrifice that relationship for Venezuelan solidarity. Chile's President Gabriel Boric, despite his own criticism of Maduro's election fraud, condemned the operation and affirmed commitment to basic principles of international law. This represents the European style social democratic position, substantively agreeing that Maduro was a dictator while procedurally objecting to his removal through American military action. The regional realignment now accelerates. Nations must choose between American partnership and opposition, knowing that opposition provides no protection. The fence sitting that characterized the past decade becomes untenable. Either you are with Washington's vision of hemispheric order, or you are a potential target of that order's enforcement mechanism. This is not subtle. It is not supposed to be. Iran, the next target. If the Venezuela operation sent a message to every hostile regime on earth, no regime received that message more clearly than the Islamic Republic of Iran. The parallels are too precise to be coincidental. The implications are too significant to be ignored. The January 3rd symbolism. Iranian commemorations of Qasem Soleimani's sixth anniversary were ongoing when news of the Maduro operation broke. The timing was not accidental. As Russia's Pravda explicitly noted on January 3rd, 2020, Trump orders the killing of Iran's General Qasem Soleimani. On January 3rd, 2026, Trump orders the capture of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. Today is a special day for Trump. The Iranian regime cannot miss the message. January 3rd has been marked. The template has been demonstrated, and Iran, unlike Venezuela, has been the subject of direct American military action within the past 7 months. Iran's official response. Tehran's reaction revealed genuine alarm beneath the standard rhetoric. The Iranian Foreign Ministry condemned the operation as a flagrant violation of the national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and a clear breach of the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter. Supreme Leader Khamenei statement carried unmistakable relevance. What's important is when one realizes an enemy wants to force something on one's government or nation with false claims. They must stand firmly against that enemy. We won't give in to them. The IRGC's statement that Trump's threats stem from desperation and its vow to defeat all plots reads as much as internal reassurance as external defiance. Iranian state media framed the operation using loaded terminology, describing Maduro as kidnapped rather than captured, emphasizing imperialism and resource theft, while drawing implicit parallels to Iran's own confrontation with Washington. The vulnerability assessment. Iran's air defense posture is significantly more robust than Venezuela's, but demonstrably insufficient against American and Israeli air power. The June 2025 12-day war provided sobering data. Israeli and American strikes destroyed approximately 120 air defense launchers, roughly one-third of Iran's pre-war inventory. The S-300 batteries around nuclear facilities were specifically targeted. Israeli F-35s operated with near impunity, achieving air superiority despite Iran's layered defense. Excuse me, sorry. All right. Iran operates the S-300 PMU-2, indigenous Bavar 373 with upgraded 300-kilometer engagement range, Core 15 quick reaction systems, and Tor M1 point defense. This is a more diverse and layered network than Venezuela possessed. Critically, Iran maintains domestic production capability for replacement systems and missiles, enabling reconstruction that Venezuela lacks. But the June 2025 strikes demonstrated that diversity in domestic production are insufficient against determined American and Israeli action. The key lesson from Venezuela that Iranian commanders are undoubtedly processing paper capability means nothing without operational readiness, integrated command, and ability to survive initial suppression operations. The legal architecture is already built. The legal predicates that enable action against Venezuela have direct analogs for Iran. The IRGC became the first foreign government entity designated as a foreign terrorist organization in 2019. In September 2025, four Iran-backed Iraqi militias were upgraded from specially designated global terrorists to full FTO status. Houthis were redesignated FTO in January 2025. The February 2025 National Security Presidential Memorandum on Iran mandated maximum pressure, including driving oil exports to zero, sanctioning Chinese refineries, processing Iranian crude, and impounding illicit oil cargoes. Treasury has designated three Chinese refineries, 29 shadow fleet vessels, and extensive oil trading networks throughout 2025. Foundation for Defense of Democracy analysis explicitly argued in December 2025 that a successful targeted blockade would cripple the Maduro regime. It also provides a blueprint for how to enforce sanctions on Iran. The blueprint has now been demonstrated successfully. The proximity to action. Just 48 hours before the Venezuela operation, President Trump issued a warning regarding Iranian protest that demands reassessment in light of subsequent events. On January 2nd, 2026, as large scale demonstrations erupted across Iran following the death of a protester in Basij custody, Trump posted, if Iran shots, it should be shoots, and violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Locked and loaded is not diplomatic language. Combined with the January 3rd action against Venezuela, the phrase takes on operational significance. American forces demonstrated their readiness. Iranian protesters received explicit American support. The regime received explicit American threat. The arithmetic of Iranian vulnerability is increasingly unfavorable. The proxy network that provided forward defense has been systematically degraded. Excuse me. Hezbollah operates at approximately level 25 capability compared to pre-war baseline of 100, with Nasrallah and his successor eliminated. Assad's collapse severed weapons supply routes. Iraqi militias face internal divisions. Only the Houthis retain meaningful operational capability. Nuclear threshold proved insufficient deterrent. With breakout time under 1 week to produce weapons grade uranium for one bomb, Iran still could not prevent the June 2025 strikes on Fordow, Nanats, and Isfahan. God, they're weird fucking language. The three threshold strategy may be reconsidered. Alliance limitations have been exposed. Neither Russia nor China intervened during June 2025. Neither will intervene if action escalates. As analysts note, neither Russia nor China seem especially interested in sticking their necks out for Iran. The economy has collapsed. The rial trades at 1.545 million to the dollar. Inflation exceeds 42%. The largest protest since 2022 challenged regime stability from within. The question Tehran cannot answer. The Venezuela operation demonstrates American willingness to execute regime decapitation when strategic conditions align. Whether those conditions will align for Iran depends on variables largely outside Tehran's control. The trajectory of protests, the coherence of security forces, the priorities of a Trump administration that has now demonstrated its doctrine twice, 6 years apart, on the same date. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid stated bluntly on Twitter, the regime in Iran should pay close attention to what is happening in Venezuela. Regime change is definitely on the table. Decapitation strikes are definitely on the table. As the Trump administration has demonstrated, there are no rules. They will do whatever they need to do to win. The regime in Iran should pay close attention. The vindication of decisive leadership. The foreign policy establishment, still dominated by veterans of the failed approaches of the past 3 decades, responded to Operation Sovereign Eclipse with predictable horror. Senator Ruben Gallego, a Democrat from Arizona, an Iraq war veteran, called the war illegal and complained that America had gone from world cop to world bully. Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii lamented that we have no vital national interest in Venezuela to justify war. These responses reveal the bankruptcy of establishment thinking more clearly than any critique could accomplish. For 30 years, American foreign policy has been dominated by the illusion that soft power alone could achieve American interest. Sanctions would change behavior. Diplomatic isolation would force compromise. International institutions would constrain adversaries. Patient engagement would transform hostile regimes into responsible stakeholders. The results speak for themselves. Iran has advanced its nuclear program despite decades of diplomacy. North Korea acquired nuclear weapons despite endless negotiations. Russia invaded Ukraine despite years of engagement. China has militarized the South China Sea despite diplomatic protest. Venezuela became a narco state and Chinese client despite every form of pressure short of military action. What President Trump understood and what his critics cannot accept is that American interests ultimately require American will. The Monroe Doctrine did not survive the 19th century through moral suasion. It survived because adversaries understood that violation would trigger American military response. The Pax Americana of the post-war era rested not on international institutions, but on demonstrated American willingness to use force when American interests required. Representative Mario Diaz-Balart of Florida praised President Trump for decisive leadership and observed, while others dithered, President Trump recognized that this threat for what it is and acted with resolve. This captures the essence of the doctrinal shift. The Delta Doctrine is not merely about Venezuela. It is about the restoration of American credibility as an actor willing to use force when force is required. For decades, adversaries watched American hesitation and calibrated their behavior accordingly. Russia invaded Ukraine because it calculated correctly that American response would be limited to economic measures. China militarized artificial islands because it calculated correctly that America would protest but not prevent. Iran pressed its regional ambitions because it calculated correctly that America would not escalate. Those calculations have now been revised, and every adversary is recalculating. Venezuela is 916,000 square kilometers, larger than Texas. It possessed some of the most advanced Russian air defense systems in Latin America. It enjoyed the diplomatic and economic backing of both China and Russia. It was not some weak, isolated target. It was a test case for whether great power protection could shield a hostile regime from American action. The answer is no, and every other regime that believed Russian weapons or Chinese investment would provide protection now knows the answer. The financial implications. For the institutional investors who constitute the primary audience of this analysis, the financial implications of Operation Sovereign Eclipse are immediate and substantial. The Venezuelan debt opportunity. Venezuelan sovereign debt, trading at approximately 20 to 25 cents on the dollar before the operation, now enters a period of profound uncertainty that simultaneously represents substantial opportunity. The 11.75% bonds due 2026 were quoted at approximately $1.50, reflecting a yield of 212% and complete expectation of continued default. PDVSA 2020 8.5% bonds, secured by a 50.1% equity pledge in Citgo Holding, traded at approximately $2.85 billion in expected bondholder claims. Recovery scenarios depend on transition dynamics. The bear case, contested secession, Chinese priority claims. Recovery of 25 to 35 cents on the dollar over 36-month horizon. Risk of prolonged uncertainty as factions compete for control and creditors compete for priority. The base case, orderly transition, negotiated restructuring. Recovery of 45 to 55 cents on the dollar over 24-month horizon. American diplomatic support accelerates restructuring. Citgo collateral provides genuine security. The bull case, rapid U.S. aligned government full market access restoration. The recovery of 60 to 75 cents on the dollar over 18-month horizon. New government prioritizes Western creditor relationships to secure investment and political support. The sophisticated trade is to begin accumulating Venezuelan paper at current distress levels while hedging China risk through short positions in Chinese firms with Venezuelan exposure. The oil warrant structure embedded in any restructuring package provides option value that current prices do not reflect. Expected value calculations suggest current trading levels understate likely recovery by 20 to 40 cents on the dollar. The regime change premium. But this is not merely a Venezuela trade. The broader implications for the emerging market sovereign risk are profound. If American military action can remove a government whose debt is held by international investors, what does that mean for the enforceability of sovereign obligations? Does regime change represent a credit event? How should investors price the risk of American-induced transition in other jurisdictions? The answer to these questions will reshape emerging market debt valuations across the board. Countries perceived as potential targets of American action will face higher borrowing costs. Countries aligned with Washington will find their credit enhanced by implicit American support. The spread between American-aligned and American-opposed sovereigns will widen. Sector implication. Russian arms exporters face immediate credit deterioration. The failure of Russian air defense systems in Venezuela destroys the primary value proposition of these companies. Rosoboronexport and its subsidiaries, should see substantial revenue decline over the medium term. Short positions here offer attractive risk reward. Chinese firms with Venezuelan exposure face significant write-downs. CNPC, Sinopec, and other state-owned enterprises with Venezuelan assets must reassess collectability of outstanding receivables and viability of ongoing operations. The new political reality in Caracas will not be friendly to Chinese interests. Iranian risk premium expands. Any exposure to Iranian regime continuity requires reassessment. The Venezuelan template combined with June 2025 precedent and January 2nd locked and loaded warning elevates Iranian regime change from speculative scenario to credible near-term risk. Oil markets remain the wild card. Venezuela possesses 303 billion barrels of proven reserves, the largest in the world, exceeding Saudi Arabia. But production has collapsed to approximately 0.86 to 1.1 million barrels per day from over 3 million in the 1990s. Global oversupply of approximately 3.85 million barrels per day provides cushion. Brent settled around 60.75 to 61.2 $60.75 to $61.21 per barrel before the Friday close. The base case is limited oil market impact in the near term. Venezuelan exports were already under pressure from the American tanker blockade. Production was already constrained by infrastructure decay. A transition government would likely seek to increase production, but this requires years and billions of investment. The tail risk is regional contagion. If Colombia's Petro escalates confrontation with Washington, if Cuba becomes the next target, if Iran experiences regime collapse and production disruption, the hemisphere and Middle East could experience instability that disrupts energy flows more broadly. This tail risk argues for upside protection on oil prices despite the current oversupply. The template effect. The most consequential implication of Operation Sovereign Eclipse is not what it means for Venezuela. It is what it means for everywhere else. The operation demonstrated a replicable template for American intervention, establish legal predicate through criminal indictment, designate target organization as foreign terrorist organizations. I just bit my tongue. Refuse recognition of hostile government's legitimacy. Execute military operation under Article 2 Counterterrorism Authority. Present world with fait accompli. This template does not require congressional authorization. The House rejected a war powers resolution by a margin of 210 to 216 in December of 2025. The Senate voted 51 to 48 against the Klain Schiff resolution. Congress returns from recess on January 6th, 3 days after the operation. By the time the first committee hearing convenes, Maduro will have been in American custody for days. The legal framework was designed to avoid congressional constraint while providing post hoc justification. The template does not require international approval. The UN Security Council will meet. Russia and China will condemn. Nothing will happen. American veto power precludes binding action against American interest. The template does not require allied participation. This was a unilateral American operation. No coalition, no consultation, no diplomatic cover. Pure assertion of American power. The next targets. Which other situations might this template address? Cuba is the obvious candidate. The Castro regime has survived American pressure for 6 decades, but Cuba lacks nuclear weapons, lacks effective air defenses, lacks great power protection with enforcement capacity. The legal predicates exist. Cuba remains a state sponsor of terrorism, designated as such by the State Department. The intelligence networks are established. The exile community provides political support. The strategic rationale is compelling. Remove the final communist government from America's hemisphere, eliminate a node of Chinese and Russian intelligence collection, unlock the Cuban economy for American investment. Nicaragua under Daniel Ortega presents similar characteristics. The Sandinista regime has grown increasingly authoritarian and increasingly hostile to American interests. Russian and Chinese ties have deepened. The template would apply with minimal modification. Iran represents the highest stakes application. The legal architecture is more developed than for any other potential target. The FTO designation covers the IRGC and multiple proxy militias. The June 2025 strikes demonstrated operational capability and willingness. The January 2nd warning demonstrated continuing intent. The protests demonstrate internal vulnerability. The question is not whether the template could apply, but whether the administration will choose to apply it. The option space for American policy has expanded dramatically, and adversaries understand this. The great power response. Russia and China face a strategic dilemma with no good options. Russia's response to the operation has been rhetorically fierce and practically impotent. The foreign ministry declared that United States committed act of armed aggression against Venezuela, and that pretexts are untenable. Moscow demanded immediate clarification on Maduro's status and called the alleged capture an unacceptable encroachment on sovereignty of independent state. But what can Russia actually do? Russian military forces are consumed by the war in Ukraine. Russia has no meaningful power projection capability to Latin America. Russian arms sales to Venezuela generated perhaps $4 to $5 billion over the years. Russian naval visits and bomber deployments were symbolic gestures, not forced commitments. Russia cannot rescue Maduro. Russia cannot punish America. Russia can only issue statements. The deeper Russian problem is credibility destruction. Moscow has built foreign policy on the proposition that Russia can protect its partners and that Russian weapons provide security. Venezuela was a showcase for both propositions. Both propositions have been demolished. Every current and prospective Russian arms customer is reconsidering. Every nation that relied on Russian partnership is recalculating. Excuse me one second. All right. Ukrainian intelligence chief Lieutenant General Kirilo Buda, reported approximately 120 Russian military personnel stationed in Venezuela, with around 90 in Caracas. Their status during the raid remains unclear. If Russian personnel were present at facilities that were struck, the implications for Russian prestige are even more devastating than the air defense failure alone. China's dilemma is different in character, but equally insoluble. Beijing has invested heavily in the narrative that China offers an alternative to American hegemony. The Belt and Road Initiative represents this narrative in physical form. Chinese investment, Chinese infrastructure, Chinese partnership as an alternative to American dominated international order. Venezuela was a test case for whether Chinese economic investment could translate into political influence and constrained American action. The test failed. Chinese Special Envoy Qui Zhao met with Maduro hours before the capture. This was not coincidence. American intelligence almost certainly knew of the meeting and chose to proceed regardless. The message was unmistakable. Chinese diplomatic engagement provides no protection. Chinese investment provides no protection. Chinese partnership provides no protection. If China cannot protect its most important Latin American partner, if Chinese investment of $60 billion provides no security, if Chinese diplomatic engagement is irrelevant when American forces deploy, what does that say about Chinese claims to great power status? The New World Order. A new world order. The capture of Nicolas Maduro crystallizes a new paradigm in international relations that will define the coming decade. Remember what I was saying at the beginning of this podcast is that's what Trump's goal has been internationally when he's negotiating how much money the NATO affiliated countries put into NATO, when he's doing the Abraham Accords, when he's negotiating these peace deals in Taiwan, etc. He's wanting to reshape the world order from the liberal economic order of post World War II to a modern world order that will move into the fourth industrial revolution, the AI revolution, if you will. The post Cold War order, such as it was, rested on assumptions that have now been proven false. International institutions would constrain great power behavior. Economic interdependence would prevent military confrontation. Soft power would gradually transform authoritarian regimes. American power would be exercised through multilateral frameworks. Sovereignty would be respected except in cases of genocide or weapons of mass destruction. None of these assumptions survived contact with the reality of great power competition. International institutions proved unable to constrain Russian aggression in Ukraine. Economic interdependence did not prevent great power conflict. Soft power failed to transform adversarial regimes. American power, when exercised through multilateral frameworks, proved ineffective. And sovereignty, it turns out, is conditional rather than absolute. The new paradigm operates on different assumptions. Power determines outcomes. Deterrence works, international law does not. Alliances matter when they represent genuine commitments backed by credible military force. Economic leverage is useful but insufficient. And sovereignty exists to the extent that a nation can defend it or to the extent that a stronger nation chooses to respect it. This is not a comfortable paradigm for those who invested their careers in the old order. It offers no role for international lawyers drafting resolutions. It offers no role for diplomats negotiating frameworks. It offers no role for NGOs monitoring compliance. It offers only the stark reality of power: who has it, who lacks it, and what happens when the disparity becomes acute. The Delta Doctrine makes this paradigm operational. It demonstrates that the United States will act when the American interests require, regardless of international legal constraints, regardless of great power oppositions, regardless of allied concerns. It demonstrates that American capabilities remain overwhelming and that American will, at least under this administration, has been restored. What comes next depends on how adversaries respond. If Russia, China, Iran, and other competitors accept the new reality and constrain their behavior to avoid provoking American response, the world enters a period of American-defined stability. If they escalate, seeking to test American resolve or to impose costs on American action, the world enters a period of escalating confrontation. The betting here is on acceptance. Russia cannot afford confrontation with America while fighting Ukraine. China cannot afford confrontation with America while managing domestic economic challenges. Iran cannot afford confrontation with America while facing international unrest and the demonstrated consequences of June 2025. The smart play for American adversaries is to take the lesson, accept the limits, and avoid conduct that triggers American response. This may appear to critics as American bullying. From another perspective, it is the restoration of deterrence that has prevented great power war for 80 years. Adversaries behave better when they believe American response is certain. They behave worse when they believe America will hesitate. The past decade demonstrated the consequences of adversaries believing America would hesitate. The Delta Doctrine ends that belief. Dawn over Caracas. As the sun rose over Caracas on January 3rd, 2026, smoke still drifted from struck facilities. Citizens emerged to find its city transformed. The dictator who had oppressed them for a decade was gone. The regime that had impoverished a nation blessed with the world's largest oil reserves had been decapitated. The Bolivarian Revolution, that fever dream of Hugo Chavez that descended into narco tyranny under his successor, had reached its terminus. What comes next remains uncertain. The transition could be orderly, managed by military commanders seeking accommodation with Washington and opposition figures seeking legitimacy. Or it could be chaotic, marked by factional fighting, score settling, and humanitarian crisis. American military action created the conditions for change. It did not determine the character of that change. But certain things are now clear. American power has been reasserted in its hemisphere with a clarity not seen since the Cold War. The Monroe Doctrine, declared moribund by generations of scholars, lives. It lives in the destroyed BUK M2E launcher at La Carlota. It lives in the silent S-300 VM batteries that never engaged. It lives in the Night Stalker helicopters that penetrated Venezuelan airspace without opposition. Russian arms exports face a credibility crisis from which recovery will take a decade. The billions spent on the S-300 and BUK systems purchased nothing but destruction. Every prospective buyer of Russian military equipment now recalculates cost and benefit. Chinese strategic investment has been revealed as insufficient to protect partners from American power. The $60 billion invested, in Venezuela purchased influence without security. Every nation that has considered Chinese partnership as an alternative to American alignment now understands the limits of that partnership. International law has been demonstrated once again to constrain only the weak. The UN Charter's prohibition on force means nothing when the actor is the world's sole superpower. The rules-based international order exists by American sufferance and operates within boundaries that American power defines. Iran watches with particular attention. The January 3rd date was chosen with precision. The Soleimani precedent lives. The template has been demonstrated. The warning has been issued. The regime in Tehran now contemplates whether it will be next. And in Washington, an administration dismissed as incompetent by the foreign policy establishment demonstrated strategic clarity and operational excellence that its critics could not imagine. The Trump White House did what decades of diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and soft power could not accomplish. It ended a narco regime with zero American casualties. The story is not over. There may be complications yet to emerge. The transition is uncertain. But the strategic meaning is already clear. America is back. American power is real. American will has been demonstrated, and every nation in the world, friend and adversary alike, now operates in a different strategic environment. For those who counsel caution and incremental pressure, who prefer diplomatic process to decisive action, who believe that international institutions can accomplish what American power alone achieves, the lesson of January 3rd, 2026 is uncomfortable. It suggests that their approach, however intellectually satisfying, has failed to protect American interests for 3 decades. It suggests that the alternative, derided as crude and destabilizing, delivers results that the establishment approach could not match. History will judge whether the Delta Doctrine produces stability or chaos, whether the template established in Caracas leads to a better world or a more dangerous one. Those judgments lie years in the future. But on this morning in January, as smoke clears over Caracas and Nicolas Maduro awaits American justice, as Tehran contemplates the anniversary date and Beijing counts its losses, and Moscow watches its weapons credibility collapse, one fact is undeniable. America acted and the world changed. So this was the Substack of Shanaka Anselm Pereira. I'm going to subscribe to him because I've never heard of him before. He's an independent strategic analyst and author of The Ascent Begins, The World Beyond Empire. Um, so there you go. I'm going to stop sharing. And as I said, man, the repercussions are yet to be seen, but we know that Trump has been, we now know for certain Trump is serious about changing the world order and how the world operates and how the world interacts with America and American power. So the future is yet to be written, but we are in a situation where things can go tip off the scales or stabilize. And I guess we will see what happens next. So I will talk to y'all later. And don't forget to subscribe to TommySalmons.com. This is my Substack. That's where you can see the video. I do have a YouTube channel. I don't push it. I don't care about YouTube. I don't give a shit. Whatever. So go to TommySalmons.com and subscribe. And don't forget about Scott Horton Academy. Go to the Scott Horton Academy. Sign up. Get all Scott Horton's great freaking lessons over there at Scott Horton Academy. LibertarianInstitute.org. We are kicking ass in the new year. 2026. We are here, baby. Stop recording.